Welcome to the molecular mass of a gas lab. We have the challenge today of finding the molar mass of an unknown gas. And the tricky part is we found a liquid for you to use today. It's a mystery liquid that at boiling water temperature, this mystery liquid is a gas. But at room temperature, of course, as you can see, it's a liquid. In short, you're going to put the liquid in this flask, put a cap on the flask, heat the liquid up in the flask. Of course, you're going to heat it in boiling water so you know the temperature of the gas when it evaporates, when it's a gas inside the Erlenmeyer flask. You know it's 100 degrees Celsius once the water's boiling. Then you're going to let that gas cool back down to room temperature. It will condense back into a liquid. We'll see the liquid rolling around the bottom of the flask. We'll measure the mass difference, and then we'll be able to determine what was the mass of the gas that filled that flask at 100 degrees Celsius. You need to make a cap for your flask, and it should be about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, but honestly, what you really want to do is make a cap for your flask that just fits over the top and fits very, very, very tightly. Like that. Once your flask is fitted, pop it off and cut those tails off because we don't want any extra material trapping water and messing with our results. Of course, they'll be evaporating, boiling, and then condensing water in this lab as well. So there's our cap. You cut the tails off, and then you can take your cap and put it back on the flask. Next to the aluminum foil, you're going to find these pins that are in corks. Take a pen and put a very, very small single hole in the top of your cap. Replace the pin into the cork. That hole is for the liquid that evaporates, that mystery liquid. When it heats up to 100 Celsius, it's going to evaporate and the excess will leave through that hole. You're going to be watching it. You're going to watch that liquid, and as soon as the liquid that's rolling around as it's heating up disappears, you get to assume that you have that gas in this flask at equilibrium pressure with the room. At that point, you'll cool. I'll show you how to do it. Since you'll want to find the difference in the mass of this flask when it's empty compared to when it's been filled with the gas from our unknown liquid, be sure to find your beginning mass of the flask with the cap on. So it's empty and it's got the cap on. The next step is to take that mystery liquid and add about 3 milliliters. Get as close to 3.0 milliliters as you can. You're always looking at the bottom of that dish that forms. That's called meniscus. And looks to me like we have 3.0 milliliters of our mystery liquid. Add that liquid to your flask. And then replace your cap. Just a reminder, you're doing this after you've masked the empty flask with the cap on. The clamp we've given you today acts as a test tube holder so that you don't have to hold the test tube. And you can see that mystery liquid in there. Right now it's evaporating already, and it's a very volatile liquid. And you'll place this down into the boiling water. Now, as that liquid increases its temperature to 100 Celsius, and you can see the liquid in there, it's going to heat up, it's going to boil, And you want to keep the flask in this boiling water until the liquid inside the flask, just at the instant the liquid inside the flask has evaporated. As the liquid inside the flask is heating up, it's evaporating and it's maintaining equilibrium pressure with the room. So the gas is expanding and heating and then exiting the tiny hole that you punctured in the aluminum foil. This is 5 minutes later. So after 5 minutes in my double boiler, you can see that I don't mix up the water on the flask with the mystery liquid in the flask. The mystery liquid in the flask is almost gone. And so watch it really closely at this point, because you want to stop boiling the flask and begin cooling it the instant the liquid inside the flask is completely boiled off. After 6 minutes, I pulled the flask out of the boiling water, and almost right away, the gas inside the flask started to condense again. I had no liquid at the bottom of the flask, which I missed in this video. And instantly, as the flask started to cool, the gas started to condense again back into a liquid at the bottom of the flask. Set that aside for a few minutes to let the flask return to equilibrium temperature with the room. After about 5 minutes, you'll notice that the liquid inside the flask has accumulated, and that liquid is the entirety of the gas that was in the flask at 100 degrees Celsius. And now that we're back to room temperature, that gas is recondensed back into a liquid. That's when you want to find your second mass. So this is your final mass. Of course, the difference, final minus initial, is the mass of the gas that was in the flask. The last quantitative step of the lab is to take your foil off and throw that in the recycling. Let the next class make their own foil cap. The mystery liquid, you can just pour down the drain, it'll just evaporate. And then find the volume of this flask. I know it says 125 milliliters, but remember that very first lab we did on measurement back in September? Those numbers are really not precise. So fill this all the way up to the top with water. Of course, it will be a greater volume than the 100 milliliter graduated cylinder that we gave you. So you'll have to pour up to or below 100, write that number down, pour that out, and then pour the rest of the volume in and add those two numbers. Really elementary stuff. But now you've got your volume of the gas. Once you have the volume of the flask, do that last so you don't mess with the internal contents of the flask. You'll have the pressure of the room, which will set up in the center of the room. You'll have the temperature of the room. Of course, the temperature of the boiling water, you don't have to measure. That's why we didn't put thermometers out, because it is 100 Celsius, 100.00 Celsius. Go ahead and assume that that's the temperature of the gas when it filled this volume of the flask. That's everything you need to know. Good luck with this one. Have fun. Thank you.